Unison, member of Unison National Executive, speaking as ever in a personal capacity tonight, as always. The speakers I'd like to introduce to speak tonight are David Vincent from the PCS, who is the regional secretary. He's on the regional committee of the Ministry of Justice. He's the branch secretary of the Ministry of Justice, Greater Manchester branch. He assures me that he's everything up to and including almost an NEC member, but not an NEC member. So he's correct, yeah. He's a regional. He's speaking from the region of the PCS. Paul Holmes on my right, immediate right, who is branch secretary of Kirklees Unison and also a member of the National Executive for the region, like myself. And Kevin Mottram, who is an NUT school rep in Salisbury Castle. So welcome to everyone as we launch into what is possibly the most significant time for trade unionism in Britain. We are in the middle of ballot periods, in the middle of ballots, and both live ballots and new balloting periods for 20 plus unions. I'm not sure exactly the figure, but if those ballots are successful, we will see nearly 4 million workers coming out on strike on the 30th of November of this year, which will be the biggest coordinated single day of action we've ever seen in this country. Excuse me. I think workers and the public are increasingly clear that this is not just a strike in defence of our pension scheme, although it is that, the public sector pension scheme, to defend that. It's also a strike to defend our terms and conditions more generally against the pay freeze that we've had already imposed on us for 2 years, and against, most significantly, the decimation of public services and the public sector in this country. It's, I think, an extremely positive mood, and certainly within Unison, towards the ballot. I work as a teaching assistant in a primary school in Calderdale, and certainly it's much easier to sell, if you like, strike action and the loss of pay that it involves to teaching assistants when they know that they will be on strike alongside teachers in the school, and quite often the head teachers. You know, that's a new situation for me, and one that I'm really enjoying because it is a much easier, you know, the fear factor is massively reduced and the confidence is massively increased because of the unified action that we hope to see. So I won't blabber on for ages because these are the people you want to hear. I'll firstly introduce Dave Vincent, who will speak to you, as I say, between 5 and 10 minutes. I would ask the speakers to be strict about that so that we can have more of you and less of the top table. Thanks.
Right, hi, I'm Dave Vincent, as been said, PCS union, that's for the lower paid civil service workers, but it's the biggest union within the civil service, about 300,000 members. Our General Secretary is Mark Sawatka. He's bound to have seen him on television and all kinds of events, national shop stewards everywhere. He turned up everywhere to keep arguing that unions should come together and deliver solidarity and act in a united fashion. And on the 30th of June, I'll sit down because I'll be squinting at my notes otherwise, so no discourtesy intended. On the 30th of June, it was great to see that the PCS, NUT, UCU and the ATL, that was their first ever strike that they'd taken, so that was historic for them, came out on the 30th of June. What really helped was there was massive media coverage. A lot of it was critical at the end of the day, but nevertheless it made the headlines, and that gets members thinking there is a point of taking action then, because if it gets no media coverage, people think what's the point, who's noticing, and that for weeks in advance, and that really made a difference. The press was telling us all the time that the Republic were against us, but that wasn't the case. The benefit of being on picket lines and on rallies and demonstrations, you actually see the public, and you could see when we were going through, and I was going through the rally through Manchester, people on the pavements were saying, good to see somebody fighting back and coming up to the picket line. There were more people from other picket lines, from other unions that had come up than I'd ever seen before on a dispute, and none of the public was saying, get back to work and you selfish people with your pensions. The media tried to say the public weren't on our side. They were, certainly the ones that we see, and it'll be more the case when it comes to the 30th of November on that. And it's the best supported strike I've ever seen. I've been a branch secretary for Greater Manchester for over 26 years now, out on all the strikes. And as a secretary, you've got to be the first one of the picket line, the last one to leave. You can't go shopping for the day and all that lot. So I've seen all the disputes in PCS, and the 30th of June was the best supported one that I'd seen. And I think that's the experience of the other unions and everybody else saying that on there. And I think it's precisely because it was 4 unions coming together that made a huge difference than PCS being on its own, like sometimes we often are. As has already been said earlier, it can be said a few times, that we face a historic prospect that 20 unions representing 3 million people could be out, and that would be bigger than the 1926 general strike that I believe was only 1.7 million. At the height of any one time, we could have 3 million out on the 30th of November, and that would get even more massive coverage on that. So it could well be historic. You can get jaded sometimes, if I'm sure the numbers around here have been around as long as I have. You can get a bit jaded where it seems to be the trade union movement has more defeats than victories. But things are changing and people are changing now. We're beginning to see that, and you can lose sight of that if you get lost in decades of defeat, to not notice how much the ground is shifting and how much people are moving as well. And the start of that was the student protests. What a welcome surprise that was, from people that are saying that young people now aren't interested in the students and the politics of protest. Well, that certainly made the headlines good on them, the young people there, the student protests, and that's furious about Lib Dems letting them down, about absolutely making an electoral promise and absolutely breaking it. That was the first one that got it all started. Then the TUC at last moved, called the 26th of March demonstration in London, and there was 500,000 turned out on that, and the biggest union ever organised protest. And in my branch there were 17 other members there, and for us that was a record, and most of them had never been on a demonstration before, so it's not the usual suspect. It was more ordinary people getting angry, deciding they had to make a stand and be seen, and they're now coming out on other demonstrations as well. So that was significant about that. It was far more people than ever done that kind of thing before. Then there was a lobby recently at the Tory Party conference, 35,000 people turned out for that, and in my branch 20, so that's our branch record, and again a number of people had never done this kind of thing before, plus a number of them that have been on the 26th of March found out you don't get arrested or beaten up, and that most people are peaceful and normal and ordinary like them as they see it, and that made it think demonstrations are fun, you get empowered by meeting other people, you're not on your own, people care like you do, and it really makes people think of coming out again next time, so keep on doing that. We've seen the St Paul's Cathedral tents protests now, you know, about the bankers and all that lot. That's fantastic. And a vicar, whatever the title they have, instead of asking the police to remove them, saying, they've got a point actually, leave them alone. And that's going on across 950 cities across the world now, about making a stand against bankers and saying we are the 99%. As opposed to the 1% that are filthy rich and getting away with it, we are the 99%. And another slogan being, we are too big to fail. Not meaning the banks are too big to fail, but we are too big to fail. And I hope that one gets taken up. And the Wall Street protest has been fantastic in the heart of America, you know, actually turning out on Wall Street, people saying, you're the people that the enemy, you're causing the misery of everything that's been going on. That is fantastic on that. And then back in Britain, the UK Tax Uncut, novel ways of organising, getting publicity, giving ideas to people how to do things, and making a point constantly about corporate tax evasion. Looking at our history, I would say that, you know, we've had a lot of disputes. We've had to fight for everything we've got today, to fight to abolish slavery, to set up trade unions, the black civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, which eventually led to Obama's election. Not that I'm saying that was great, but I mean, it was significant in terms of would they have ever thought they'd have a black president. Women's emancipation, the suffragettes fighting in the 1920s for the right to vote, the Ford women's machinists in Dagenham in the late 60s for equal pay, police raid on Stonewall about the fight back by lesbian and gay people, helping get respect for their sexuality and the right to have that. The long campaign to free Nelson Mandela, the ending of apartheid and black majority rule, the poll tax fight, that took 2 years of hard work before it was seen in a victory. And then the 12th of February, Stop the War protest, 1 million people out. It might not stop the war, but it exposed the fallacy we live in a real democracy and revealed Blair as a lying warmonger, that torpedo, I'm a regular guy and I'm nice. People didn't look at him the same after that. But those were all single issue campaigns at the time by different people, different groups at a time. This time, the Tories have to be absolutely stupid, or I think it's plain arrogant, to bring all these cuts in, affecting all these groups of people all at once. And that is going to be their undoing, so long as we get everybody organised. So it'll be women and black people once again facing the worst cuts within the public sector. So those groups that thought had got all their rights, we're having to fight for it all over again. But the sheer number of people, they're taking on the whole of the trade union movement all at once by attacking our pensions, rather than Thatcher taking on the miners and then the steel workers, all that separate. This arrogant bunch of people think they can take on the whole trade union movement in one. And we have to make clear, as has been said again by our chair, that on the 30th of November, we're not just out for public sector selfish pensions looking after ourselves. We have to say we're in favour of pensions for everybody, decent pensions for everybody, so it's not seen the way the media dividing us up between we're the enemies of the private sector and all that, and we don't care about the private sector. We say, and we want decent pensions for you as well. And I think the private sector will then be quite pleased at us saying that, and then we'll come on board and say, and join a union and get organised and fight for decent pensions along with us. And then the privatisation now, what the real agenda about all the cuts are is privatisation of the public sector. Everybody now knows what a rip-off the gas, water, electricity and rail privatisations have been. So again, the public now don't support privatisation anymore. They know it's an absolute rip-off and they're coming for our public services, and I think they won't get away with privatisation now like they did previously. We get this right about the 30th of November and uniting everybody else, unions can be popular again and more importantly relevant again to ordinary working people, whether they're unemployed, pensions or whatever. We can do something about that, and the biggest weapons we have as trade unions is our ability to organise people, to agitate, to argue the alternatives and to actually stand up and encourage people to say no. And we've got our own publicity that we can get out to people. So the trade union movement can do a lot to reach out to people who are too vulnerable or disorganised to fight for themselves. But unions can show that they're not just interested in their own work, it's everybody and all the other vulnerable groups as well. The unions can reinvent themselves and make them relevant to everybody in society now, after all the bad press they've got. People are sick of the media bias, of MPs fiddling their expenses, of Murdoch's empire of corruption and lies, and after whopping, isn't it great to see him get his comeuppance, what's happened with him at the end of the day on that. But they're seeing now his influence that he's had. But the point we have to get to people is saying 1 million people sat at home worrying or being angry, shouting at the television are invisible, and that won't achieve anything but isolation, despair and demoralisation. But 1 million people on the streets again and again and again, that makes world news, and I think people are picking up on that. People are more willing, as I said earlier, to start getting up and standing up, and the more they see it going on, the more unions reach out to people, the more we're going to see that coming on. I think we have to say that we have to be a bit careful about a divide over the cuts, because you hear some people within the union movement talk about saying they're only against the coalition government's cuts, and that's a subtext for saying, but it's all right if it's Labour. Well, it's not all right if it's a Labour Party. It's disgraceful that Ed Miliband is saying that he's not going to pledge to reverse this government's cuts, you know, and then that was Ed Bowles, sorry, and Ed Miliband criticising the 30th of June. Let's see if he dares criticise the 30th of November. If he does, they're not going to get elected. But I won't go for just saying I'm against the coalition government's cuts. I'm against all cuts, whatever government makes them at the end of the day. Labour's advice over the poll tax was to pay it, wait and vote Labour, and their advice again now is to put up with cuts, wait and vote Labour. I say that we won't wait and we can't wait, and again, people are changing. The PCS alternative, thank you, and I'll finish on this point. The PCS alternative that we've been going on for a while now, because the press keeps telling everybody that we've got a huge deficit. The three main political parties keep saying we've got to address the deficit. The only difference between Labour and the Lib Dems and Tories will take a little longer to bring the cuts in, but they don't say they'll build it less, they'll just phase them in over a longer period. So the myth to everybody else is, so it's necessary, we have to have all these cuts in. The PCS alternative is that the misery being visited on our communities is £93 billion. That's the savings that are made for all this misery. But if we caught the tax evaders and the tax dodgers, and us working in the civil service, we know about that. So we can say that 120 billion is going uncollected and evaded. So that is why our General Secretary says there's not a job needs to be lost, there's not a service needs to be cut, you just need to catch the tax people, you know, the tax evaders and avoiders, and there'll be no need for all this. And that's the message that the trade union movement needs to get across. There is an alternative, the cuts are bogus, you haven't got to put up with them, so unite and fight and keep on shaming all the tax evaders and do something about it. And the final point I mentioned on that, at the time all this is going on, George Osborne, in making out that we've all got to share the misery, we're all in this together, is talking about abolishing the 50% tax rate for the rich, boldly coming out with that, and then giving big businesses letting them off on corporate tax, and then all the deals that have been done about Vodafone getting away paying £4 billion, and then 98 out of 100 of the top FTSE companies have all got their millions and billions in offshore tax havens. It's an absolute scandal. So the PCS alternative is you don't need to do any of these cuts. Just get after the filthy rich, the 1%. We're the 99%. Go after them. You don't need to do any of these cuts. And the more we keep getting that message out across to people, the more livid and angry they will be. And I think the more it will be, they'll turn out on the streets when we tell them the alternative. It's not going to come from most of the media. We have to get the message across. And the final point is, it takes us a while to get our message across. We're up against a massive media that has the television all the time, the internet and all the newspapers. But like all these other single issue campaigns I've said before, if right is on your side, you get the message across and you win the argument. I have faith that we will get that message across, that the cuts are bogus, that'll get people angry. You don't have to accept them, fight back. And as was said at the TUC conference a year ago by a woman delegate there, this is the fight of our lives and we have to win it. And I'll finish on this saying, all in it together, let's on the 30th of November be all out together. Thank you.